Hello friends, my name is AJ. Today I'm going to teach you how to use the UI search bar to filter data inside of your UI table views in your iOS app using Swift. Without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so I'm just going to open up Xcode here, and I'm going to create a new Xcode project. That way I can kind of walk you through all of the different steps. I'm just going to name this search bar test. But of course, you can always add this to any app that you are already, creating or using. All right, so now it is open. I'm going to go over first to my main.storyboard because my main.storyboard file will be using for this particular tutorial. It's pretty easy. And what I'm going to do is I want to add a UI table controller, a UI table view controller to my main.storyboard file and into my storyboard right here. And now I'm going to click on this arrow that's on this view controller here. And I'm going to click and drag this arrow from this view controller over to my first view controller. And the reason I'm doing that, again, is simply so that the initial page that opens up when I open the app is going to be my view controller instead of this blank, is going to be my table view rather than this blank page. And in fact, I can just delete this blank page. I won't need it for the rest of this tutorial. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to actually create a table view controller file that I can use to manage this particular view controller inside of my storyboard. So to do that, under my directory, right, search bar test, I'm going to right click and I'm going to click on new file. I'm going to click on Cocoa Touch class, and then I'm going to set my subclass to UITableViewController. And then the name, I can just name this, for example, my table view controller. You can really name it anything you want. And I'm going to save it inside of my folder. All right, so now this is the my table view controller.swift file, just like this. And there is a lot of stuff. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be deleting these bottom comments. These won't be necessary for the remainder of our specific tutorial here. Okay, so I'm just going to delete these. And then also inside of my view controller, I am just going to clean this up a little bit and delete some of the comments. There we go. Now it is much more readable and easier for us to work with. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my main.storyboard file, and I'm going to click on the table view controller. Now I'm going to go to the identity inspector, which is the one right over here. It's like a little rectangle, almost looks like a postcard from far away if you haven't used it already. And then under your class right here, you're going to use the drop-down menu and select your new My Table View Controller class. And now the class that's on this particular Swift file is now connected to the Table View Controller here inside of our storyboard. All right, so now what we can do is we can simply work with creating some sample data first, right? Because the entire thing that we want to do is we want to add a search bar to our table view. So in order to actually search properly, we need to have some sort of data already in our table view. So that is what we're going to do now very quickly. And again, the reason why I didn't want to do this beforehand is simply so that you had a little refresher and you saw how everything works. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array of strings that will store the data for this particular, that will be shown inside of my table view. So I'm going to use let data because I want to create a constant. This data should not change. That's why it's let instead of var. And I'm going to set it equal to an empty array. Now inside of my array, I can put the data that I want to show. So for example, let's say I want this data to be on fruit, for example. What I can do is I can add, for example, apples, oranges, maybe pears, bananas, and then maybe plums. Okay, so these are a few sample strings that we can use as data to show inside of our search or inside of our table view. Now what we need to do is we need to actually somehow show this stuff inside of the actual table view, right? We have the data here, but now we have to show it. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to look at these two methods which already exist. And these are table view methods. The first one is number of sections. And we're only going to have one section of items inside of our table view. So I can simply return 1. But then for the number of rows in that section, or how many rows I'm going to have, I simply want the number of rows to be equal to the number of data points inside of my data array. So I can simply say return data.count here. And that will again return the number of items inside of this data array. So now we know how many sections there should be and how many rows that there should be in that section, but we don't actually know how the cell should look, and that is the next part. So underneath this particular closing brace, I'm simply going to tab and I'm going to start typing in cell for row. You can see right here the first item that should appear in your autocomplete menu is a function, table view function, that says here cell for row at index path. Double click on this and you'll see that it creates a new method right here. And this method can be used to actually tell the program tell the app basically what I want to show as each of my cells. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to actually create the cell that I want to show. So I'm going to say let cell, okay? And then the way that I actually create this cell is I say equals table view, which already exists within the table view controller, and table view is the actual table view inside of the view controller. They're connected. So you could say table view dot DQ reusable cell with identifier. It's very, very long, but it is the first one right here. DQ reusable cell with identifier, and then there is a string here. Now the last thing that I want to do is I actually want to return my cell, because once I create the cell, this function will return a UITableView cell, and I need to actually return cell here to fulfill that requirement. And now the last thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that my cell is unwrapped, as that it's supposed to be a UITableView cell. All right, so now what goes inside of this string here, right? This identifier. So what you actually have to do here is you have to go to your storyboard, and then under your cell, so if you click on the table view cell over here inside of your hierarchy, and under the attributes inspector, which has the little almost slider icon, there is a box for identifier. And it says reuse identifier. And this is what you want to, this is where you want to set that value. I'm simply going to set it to cell, all lowercase. And now I'm going to copy the exact text inside of this identifier field here in my pane. And I'm going to paste it into this particular spot over here inside of a string. And now this will basically allow us to create a cell. Now the last thing that I want to do is I actually want to display the name or the specific data inside of my cell. So to do that, I can say cell, which is now a UITableView cell. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply actually going to say as table view cell, UITableView cell over here. And that will basically allow me to have to do less unwrapping throughout my code. And then you can see there's a little error. Click the last icon to add a little exclamation point to force unwrap the thing over here. And now you simply can erase the little exclamation point from the return statement because you don't need to unwrap it. It has now been unwrapped automatically within this, or within the creation of the cell variable. So now you can use cell, which is of type UITableView cell, dot text label. So now this will access the text label inside of our cell. Then here we can say dot text, and now we can set the text for our table, or our text label inside of our table view cell. So what I want to set this to is I want to set this to a value within data. So I'm going to put in my data here. Now, of course, data is an array, so I have to get a specific string out of my array. So to do that, I use brackets. But then what do I put inside of here? What's the index that I want to get out of the data? Well, that's going to depend on what row this actually is. So to type that into code, you say indexPath.row. And this will basically return here the data for whichever row it is. So for example, if it's the first row, it's going to give apples. If it's the third row, it's going to give pears, etc., like that. All right, so that should be all of the code here in order to actually populate our table view. So I'm going to run my code right over here. And we're going to load this up. Sometimes the iPhone simulator takes a while to load. Right now, okay, and now you can see that all 5 elements, or all 5 strings, are now in my table view. And this is perfect. This is what we want. Now, the second part of this is to actually add the search bar to my table view. So to do that, under the main.storyboard, I'm going to click on the plus button, and I'm going to search for search bar. Then I can simply click and drag my search bar from here onto the very top, right above my table view, right here. So now you can see there is a search bar that is above my cells. Now what I want to do is I want to click on these little lines over here next to my pane. And then you want to click on Assistant. So this will open up the Assistant Editor, and this will allow me to be able to see my code on one side and my storyboard on the other. Now I'm simply going to right click, or if you don't have right click, if you're using one of those fancy Apple mouses, you can you can control click and drag. So control and left click drag, or right click and drag from your search bar over to your code right here. And what you want to do is you want your connection type to be outlet, and you can name this, for example, search bar. All right, so that is all that we're going to have to do now inside of our storyboard. So we can close out of the Assistant Editor and actually open up our code so that we can work in full screen. So now what I want to do is, in order for me to use anything relating to the search bar and to be able to use search bar methods and to be able to get everything hooked up, I need to actually extend my TableViewController class to be able to do that. And so I have to simply here, next to UITableViewController, I need to put a comma, and then I type in UISearchBarDelegate. And this will basically allow us to have access to the methods and the functions that allow us to make the search bar work, essentially. Now, in order to connect the search bar to my class, I have to, inside of the viewDidLoad, say searchBar.delegate equals self. And again, self refers to the class that I am working in. Okay. Now that I have done this, I have set my search bar to be connected and set the delegate for the search bar as this particular class here. We can now work with a search bar method to be able to, whenever the search bar is edited, to be able to filter out our data options to fit whatever the search bar, whatever you type into the search bar. So to do that, I'm simply going to say mark here search bar config. And again, this is just a comment that wasn't necessary. It's just so that you can see in this little side view, you can see a little comment, just so that it's easy readability and for scrolling purposes. So now what I want to actually do here is I want to type in search bar. And you will see this could be your first option, but if it's not, it'll be further down a little bit. But it should say search bar, open parentheses, and then in here it should say text did change. You're going to double click on this function. And what this function will allow us to do is it basically will allow us to, whenever the text inside of the search bar changes, to run the code inside of here. Okay. So now what do I need to do? Well, I want to actually create a new array where I can store the filtered data in, right? Because what I'm going to be doing in this function is I'm going to be filtering out my data into the relevant, only the things that are relevant should be left over, and I need to store those relevant things somewhere else. So up here, I'm going to say let filtered data, and this is going to be of also a string array type, and I'm going to set this equal to data right here, and this should be lowercase data. This should be the same as my variable that stores my data up here. All right, and now you actually notice here that it says that it cannot use instance member data. So actually, I'm going to delete the equals data, and I'm going to put an exclamation point, which will basically say that this field exists but is not initialized. Okay, and then from here I need to initialize it. So in my view did load, I can say filtered data equals data, just like that, and that should bypass the error. And I need to make sure that this is a var because I will be editing the value later instead of an actual constant. Okay, so now there are no errors and we can continue on. So now down here, what I actually want to do is I want to create some sort of algorithm that will fill my filtered data with the actual strings inside of my data array that match with what is typed in the search bar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say here, filtered data equals an empty array. That's the first thing I want to do. I want to clear out everything out of there that was already there so we can replace it. And now my algorithm is simply going to have a for loop. So I'm going to say for, and I can just say fruit because that is what data I'm storing in my data array. So I'm going to say for fruit in data, open and close curly brace right here. And then I'm simply going to have an if statement. I'm going to say if my fruit dot contains right here, and then inside of my contains in the parentheses, I can put in search text. So if the fruit actually contains my search text, then I want to add it to my filtered data. Now, one thing to make this a little bit better is if you after fruit say dot lowercase, and then also your search text should be dot lowercase. And the reason you want to compare at lowercase is, for example, if I have banana, but I type in banana lowercase, when in my table it was uppercase, it is the same thing, right? But it will not show up otherwise. If you don't include lowercase, it will say that they're not equivalent, so it will not show up. This way, it kind of removes that. So if you accidentally forget a capitalization somewhere, it won't, or auto capitalization does not happen or something, then it will not mess up the searching. Then I'm going to have open and close curly brace after my if statement. And then finally, I can simply say filtered data dot append to add a new element, and then I add in fruit. I only add my fruit string again if it matches, or if it contains the search text. And the order here also is important, right? Because your search text, it should not be search text contains fruit, right? Because the search text, as you're typing in, you want it so that you don't have to type in the entire thing before it shows up. You should be able to start typing and then things slowly get filtered out as you're continuing to type, okay? So now after my for loop is run, I can simply say here self dot table view, or I can just, sorry, I don't want the function, just table view, and then dot reload data. And the reason I use the reload data method is simply so that, it refreshes every time. And otherwise, if you don't add reload data, it's not going to filter out anything. Now, the last thing I want to think about is what happens if I delete all of the item, or if I delete all of the text inside of my search bar, right? And if I delete all the text in my search bar, nothing is actually going to happen, right? It's just going to be blank. So what I actually want to do here is I want to say if my search bar, or if my search text is equal to a empty string, then I want to say my filtered data equals data again. So when I delete everything from my search bar, it will repopulate that array with data. And then I want to put this for loop where I actually am trying to compare the fruit with whatever I typed in, I want to put this inside of an else statement. The reason I want to, again, put this inside of an else statement is simply so that you are only filtering the data and you're only adding the fruit to the filtered data when there is something in the search bar. All right, so that pretty much wraps it up, but there's only one more change we have to do. Now in here, you'll notice that my number of rows in section is set to data.count. And the cell for row index path, also the value I'm pulling from data. But now that changes. Because I have a search bar and I could be filtering and my data could change, I need to use filtered data instead. I need to use filtered data instead of the data array that was already there. All right, so now if we are to run this particular program on the simulator, you will see that my list is here perfectly, and then as I start to type, you can see that it filters out as I am typing. All of the items inside of my table view filter out. And even if I type in, for example, A, even though it may not start with A, anything that contains that specific pattern works. Like if I type in AN, oranges and bananas will show up. And my search bar works perfectly. Right? When I delete and it's blank, my search bar is blank, everything reappears. All right, everyone, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, feel free to like and subscribe for more content. More Swift content will be coming in the future.